I can tell you on day one, when we start deporting illegal immigrants, they will be coming over the northern border into Canada. And I think it's vitally important that you understand that you need to strengthen your borders, because I can tell you what's coming in on our southern border are bad actors. We have terrorists, we have people from prisons, we have fentanyl coming over our border, human trafficking, and they're going to have to flee somewhere. And I believe it'll be over the northern border.
That's Donald Trump's former ambassador to Canada on this program, issuing a warning about Trump's pledge to deport millions of migrants, as he says, on day one of his presidency. Quebec's premier, in response, says he's worried about what that might mean for the Roxham Road crossing, which has already seen record levels of irregular border crossings back in 2022 and 2023, until a deal was essentially reached between Canada and the U.S. to curb them. The RCMP says they've got contingency plans in place for a potential influx of migrants, something they started working on when Donald Trump first announced his plans. Take a look.
We knew that there are a lot of people in the United States who will fear to be deported. And if that happens, they won't wait for the Trump administration to seize power. It's more likely that they will attempt to cross into Canada from now in the next few weeks until he takes on power.
What I want to do is make sure that Mr. Trudeau, the federal government, take this seriously.
We're not expecting the worst case scenario. We're preparing as any responsible government should in terms of contingencies. But we also think it's important not to scare Canadians.
So how big of a political challenge could this be for the federal government? Let's talk to the front bench about that. Laura D'Angelo is with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. I was going to say next to her, but nope, that's not wrong. There over in Toronto is Jamie Ellerton. He's a conservative strategist and the founding partner of Canaptus Limited. Back here in studio, George Soul, actually sitting next to Laura, was the former director of communications for the federal NDP. He's now a principal at Syntax Strategic. And next to him, Judy Trin is, of course, a CTV national news correspondent. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you. Judy, I'm going to start with you because you've been working on this story about the border. You're the one who did the interview with the RCMP. Dominic LeBlanc, the Minister of Public Safety, they're kind of downplaying it. Not too worried right now. What are your thoughts about what's really happening behind the scenes?
Well, you know what? They are preparing for the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario that they are prepared for is in excess of 500 crossings a day at Roxham Road. That's the maximum. That's where they peaked at Roxham Road. So what are they doing? The RCMP is going to have more patrols, but they're also going to patrol the woods. They're possibly going to draw officers from other divisions into that Quebec area. There's an 800-kilometer border with the U.S. there. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to either build or rent or buy trailers, because once people cross over, they're going to have to process them somewhere. They're preparing anywhere from a trickle, a few families, to a flood. So that's what they're saying.
I think it's interesting, George, that the logistics are being worked on in this way. And I imagine that provides some reassurance. But from a political perspective, I mean, this is coming at an interesting time for the federal government, who has, since the first Trump presidency, dramatically altered policy around immigration, including a few weeks ago announcing a drastic cut of 20% to the permanent immigration rates. How big of a potential issue is this if there's even the story of people flooding over the border and trying to escape this deportation?
Well, first of all, here, listening to the former ambassador, I'm glad I don't own a cat, because I don't know why I shouldn't add that to the list of the terrible things they're going to be crossing our borders. They're going to eat the cats. Look at Toronto. But I do think that it's something that the government has to be ready for, and I think that it's a fine line dance for them. They want to look like they're incredibly accepting and open, but they're also trying to look tough at the border. And so it's going to be a hard dance for the Liberals to, as they often do, try to balance between the two extremes. And I think that it's going to be the people that live in those communities along the border in Roxham Road. I understand their concerns. It is a valid concern, but we also have to make sure that people are there to take care of these folks who are leaving some of the worst situations in the world. And they know they're going to be thrown out, maybe even treated worse. And Donald Trump's talking about spending $88 billion a year to kick out 1 million, what he calls illegal immigrants, but even legal ones. So, yeah, I think Canada's going to have to get ready and figure out what our position is. And I think it's going to be more than just what happens in the coming months. It's about a full strategy and philosophy about who we want to be as a country when we live next to Donald Trump.
I think that the balance that George references, Laura, is like pertinent. I remember thinking back to 2016, right, when Justin Trudeau put out a tweet that then ended up being interpreted in a certain way and sort of like really jumped on by the opposition. And I understood why in certain aspects, and in others it was less understandable. But in this case, I wonder if you think the sort of context around the way in which they decide to strike that balance has changed. And by that, I mean like sentiment around immigration is different. Even the Liberals, the way they talk about immigration in the past month has drastically shifted from 6 months ago or a year ago. Like, will it be maybe a bit easier for them to take a harder line? And I don't know what the long-term impact of that is, because the brand of the Liberal Party is kind of one to be welcoming to immigration. But in the medium term, at least, are they able to do that?
I think in the medium term, it is easier to take a harder line. They've committed to reducing numbers by 20%, immigration numbers. And so I think it's easier to take a harder line. I do think we are about to witness a really difficult balance, to George's point, about what they are trying to do politically and what, as a country, Canada has largely done for a very long time, which is welcome people in need, particularly people who are fleeing and have really terrible situations. There's also a difficult balance. You know, I think we've all read lots of the stories today where a lot of the people who voted for Trump on immigration issues are immigrants themselves. Yeah. And that is a really difficult balance. And that rhetoric that is out there, we followed the system, we waited our turn. In some cases, we waited in really terrible situations. Mm-hmm. There is a risk that that rhetoric also comes to Canada, and then what do we do, right? How do we start reckoning with our identity as a country and a welcoming place, and also, you know, maintaining the right threshold to our economy?
I think I would argue, Jamie, that has already arrived to a certain degree in Canada. I think, you know, if I look even at my own inbox when I cover stories of immigration, it is many people who have immigrated here through proper channels, particularly during those years when Roxham Road was a big issue, who were responding the most forcefully to it and very upset that that was a way in which, you know, people could seek asylum when they had to go through different channels. Like, there are germane differences about everybody's situation, and I get that. But I think like that sentiment that Laura expresses is already present to a certain degree here.
Here, Vassy, is there's effectively two types of immigration to the country right now. Regular immigration, which is managed and controlled, whether that's refugees literally being resettled after having designated status, coming in through family sponsorship, economic migrants, etc., and the irregular stream. We already have seen in recent years a massive uptick in asylum claims at Canadian airports as a result of the federal government essentially saying, forget the visa requirements, wave them all in. And on the Roxham Road side, they had no control over this for the longest time. And their grand solution was to put a welcoming trailer at the base of Roxham Road, bring these people to Montreal for processing, and then effectively ship them in a bus to Ontario, where they were put up in hotels, and that most have now, to some degree, integrated into society. But the challenges now in 2024, compared to even, say, 6 years ago, is the housing crisis is far more acute. They've lost control of the regular immigration system. They're talking about, oh, we're reducing it by 20%, but that's still like over 100,000 more people that were coming in when they took office in 2015. And so the government's lost the handle on all of this. And the blunt reality is, I don't think Canada currently has the resources to actually police our border and put the manpower and technology in place to actually stop the flow. So unless they're infiltrating the organized human smuggling operations that actually exist on the U.S. side of this, that are effectively bringing them to the Canadian border and to say, go walk across, anything that doesn't disrupt that actually quite sophisticated human smuggling network is just going to be essentially a talking point for Dominic LeBlanc to say they're doing something without having great effect.
Judy, you spoke, I think, also to the border guard union,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And they're also conveying that they feel short on staff.
What the union representing the CBSA agents say is that they are currently short-staffed now, 2,000 to 3,000 workers. So how are they going to deal with an influx when they don't even have the capacity to deal with current situations? And I think, to Jamie's point, another challenge will be the government is saying that they will rely on their good relations with the U.S. Border Patrol, with their U.S. counterparts. But if, with the Trump administration coming in, I do not see U.S. Border Patrols, saying, okay, do not cross into Canada, stay here. We're going to, wait for deportation, right? Why not offload the problem to Canada?
Yeah, it's a valid point. I feel like this is going to be a live issue in the next few months, as the RCMP officer pointed out, right? In the interim, before that day one pledge comes true, there's going to be a lot that goes on in between.